Members are attending in person, and we will have someone on Zoom in the second hour. And just a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Just make sure that the headsets are placed away from the microphones. We want to make sure that we don't cause any damage to our interpreters, and so be mindful of that. There's little stickers on the desk. So, and we are going to start with our first hour today, and I want to welcome from Democracy Watch, Mr. Duff Conacher, the co-founder, also board member and chairperson of the Government Ethics Coalition. Mr. Conacher, you have up to 5 minutes for your opening statement. Ms. Church, are you raising a point of order?
Yeah, it is point of order, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just had a question about the agenda. We have 3 witnesses today, but they haven't been allocated equal times during our agenda. Is it possible that we are allocating our witnesses equal time as we proceed during the study?
I don't quite understand the question. We have 3 witnesses today. We have 2 coming in the second hour, Ms. Turnbull and Mr. Stedman, and then Mr. Conacher for an hour today. So it was an hour and an hour. The original intent and goal was to have 2 witnesses per hour, and it didn't end up that way. So we ended up like this. Okay, so that's how we ended up with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think maybe just in future it would be good to have all our witnesses have equal opportunity to speak at committee.
Okay. And they will. Certainly in the second hour they will. Mr. Seri, on the same point of order.
Yeah, same point. C'est par rapport parce que moi.
I understand that we don't split things by topic, but we have 3 witnesses here, and 1 witness is getting half of the time, and then the other 2 sharing the other half of the meeting. I was wondering why we didn't share the time more fairly between our witnesses. It's the same topic. It would have made sense if there were 2 separate topics, but it is the same topic for the 3 witnesses. So I wanted to know how this decision was made.
In the absence of any witness lists from any of the parties, we were working on the witness list from the analysts, and so the invitations went out. Mr. Conacher was available in this hour. Ms. Turnbull and Mr. Stedman were available in the second hour, and that's how it is difficult sometimes to manage and manipulate the way witnesses are going to appear, but this is the way it's happening today. So, and just a reminder again to all witnesses or to all parties that we need that witness list by today as well if you haven't sent it in. Okay, so we're going to start. Mr. Conacher, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair and Committee, for the invitation and opportunity to testify on the Conflict of Interest Act, one of Canada's most important laws for ensuring democratic good government. I will make my presentation today mainly in English. Il faut que je pratique mon français beaucoup et il y a beaucoup de termes techniques.
I need to practice my French, and it's quite a technical topic.
I present mainly in English, but I welcome your questions in either language. Democracy Watch is Canada's leading democratic reform, government accountability, government ethics advocacy organization. We've been operating since 1993, 32 years this week, actually. And we have 41,000 supporters across the country. I'm also here representing the Government Ethics Coalition, a coalition of citizen groups pushing for ethics reforms. It's great that the committee is holding open hearings, unlike the secretive behind-closed-door hearings that another House committee held in 2022 to review the MP Ethics Code. Conservative MPs and Bloc MPs, you're asking some good questions, better questions about the Act than have been asked by MPs at this committee in the past 20 years. So it's great to see that. But you are still missing some key loopholes and flaws and not cutting through the obscurities and misleading haze about the Act that the Ethics Commissioner Conrad von Finkenstein creates whenever he talks about the Act. Hopefully, Liberal MPs on this committee, you will set aside your talking points and prepared questions
don't worry about
that the Cabinet and Research Bureau have prepared for you, and actually listen and think about the seriously unethical, undemocratic, and bad government actions that are currently legal under the Conflict of Interest Act, and why long overdue changes need to be made to ensure democratic good government now and into the future. The Conflict of Interest Act and the related MP Code and Senate Ethics Code and the codes that apply to federal government employees are among the most important laws and codes for ensuring democratic good government. Unfortunately, and Democracy Watch's written submission to the committee will provide all of the details, section by section, the Conflict of Interest Act is a sad joke that, because of huge loopholes in the law, doesn't apply to 99% of the decisions and actions of the most powerful people in the government. It really should be called, because of these loopholes, the Conflict of Interest Act really should be called the almost impossible to be in a Conflict of Interest Act. The Conflict of Interest Act, which covers cabinet ministers, their staff, and top government officials, does not prevent, prohibit, or penalize conflicts of interest. So it's truly Orwellian. In fact, the Act is so full of loopholes that allow powerful politicians and public officials in the federal government to have secret investments, to secretly participate in decisions when they have a clear financial conflict of interest, and to secretly profit financially from their decisions. The Act is weaker than the rules for senators and federal government employees, and as weak as the rules for backbench MPs, which makes no sense at all. It is simply perverse that the most powerful politicians and office holders in Canada's federal government have much weaker ethics requirements and standards than the least powerful public servants. If you support the Conflict of Interest Act in its current form, and if you support the weak and in some cases dangerous proposals for amendments that the Ethics Commissioner von Finkenstein has put forward, if you support the Act in its current form or with these weak amendments, you support protecting private interests, you support politicians and public officials profiting financially from their decisions, and you support unethical and corrupt policymaking, all of which violates the public interest clearly. As the Globe and Mail put it in an editorial in June, a plan to make changes to make the Conflict of Interest Act actually effective is missing in action, MIA. The Conservatives made some promises in their election platform, but they were a bit vague and focused pretty much only on the Prime Minister's role and position. The Liberals bloc and NDP made no promises. The Globe's editorial also criticized the Ethics Commissioner's very limited recommendations in his annual report, which you've heard about from him. And in some cases, those recommendations, again, would weaken the law. Hopefully, instead of keeping this sad joke of a law that has done very little to clean up federal politics in the past 20 years, almost, all federal parties will work together and go beyond the Ethics Commissioner's mostly bad recommendations to finally close all the loopholes in all federal political ethics laws and codes and strengthen enforcement and penalties so politicians and their staff and top government officials are no longer allowed to make unethical, self-interested decisions or secretly profit from their decisions. I will now provide a quick summary of the dirty dozen loopholes in the Act, and similar loopholes exist in the MP Ethics Code and Senate Ethics Code, along with enforcement flaws. Again, Democracy Watch's written submission will provide all the details, including a link to my 900-page plus PhD thesis, which analyzed the Act and codes and other federal democracy laws and recommended key changes, in case you want even more details. I welcome your questions about anything concerning effective government ethics standards and enforcement after I briefly list the loopholes in enforcement. Rule requiring honesty.
I'm sorry, Mr. Conacher, we have 5 minutes, so we're over that time. I'm going to suggest if you wanted to in your brief, or if it comes up in questioning, you can refer to that, but I'm going to have to stop you there.
Okay, that's fine.
Because we're going to start with our first round of questioning, and I apologize for that, sir, but we want to get to questions. Mr. Cooper, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Conacher, Mr. Carney's ethics disclosure states that he is entitled to carried interest payments, a.k.a. future bonus pay, in respect of the performance of Brookfield's global transition funds, in which he co-led efforts to raise billions of dollars of capital for. But what is missing from Mr. Carney's disclosure are the holdings in this fund, the companies that this fund is invested in. Would you agree that this is a significant and material omission from the standpoint of knowing the extent of Mr. Carney's conflicts of interest?
Yes, and unfortunately, though, the disclosure rules allow for secret investments, essentially. The details are not provided.
Yeah, it's a material omission, would you agree? Because Mr. Carney handpicked the holdings and the companies that the fund is invested in, and therefore the companies his future performance pay worth potentially tens of millions of dollars is tied to, correct?
Yes, so when you have these kind of general funds, which again, it's legal to invest in some of them and keep it secret, some types of mutual funds, the details of what you're actually invested in is known to you, but not disclosed to the public.
So Mr. Carney therefore knows which public policy decisions will impact these holdings, which in turn impacts the future performance of the fund, which in turn affects the value of his future bonus pay. Meanwhile, Canadians are left in the dark. So Mr. Carney, as it pertains to his future bonus pay, is hiding his conflicts of interest from Canadians, isn't he?
Yes, again, that's legal to do, and what's even worse, because of another, the biggest loophole in the Act, he is allowed to participate in decisions 99% of the time that affect his investments, because the definition of private interest in the Act says that you are not in a conflict, and the Act does not apply when you are dealing with a matter that applies generally, and 99% of decisions that Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers and top government officials make apply generally. And so the Act only applies 1% of the time to very specific decisions. And as a result, it's almost impossible to be in a conflict of interest under this Act.
And I agree with you on that point. But to be clear, just with respect to disclosure, there's nothing that prevents Mr. Carney from disclosing the companies and the holdings of these funds, is there? If he wanted to be transparent, he could simply disclose that information to Canadians?
Of course, you can always go beyond what's required in terms of disclosure and also compliance.
But Mr. Carney, of course, hasn't been transparent. Now, the Global Transition Funds is listed in Mr. Carney's so-called ethics screen, but given that the holdings and the companies that the fund is invested in and in which Mr. Carney's future performance pay is tied to have not been disclosed by Mr. Carney, how possibly can the ethics screen function to screen out Mr. Carney for making decisions where he has conflicts of interest?
Well, the ethics screen never works because, again, of this huge loophole. So ethics screens are a smoke screen that actually violate the law because the Act requires disclosure whenever you recuse yourself, step aside from participating in a decision, discussion, or vote. And the ethics screen allow you to not do that. So you're violating the law, and what's hidden is that, in fact, you're participating 99% of the time in decisions that affect your investments because of this huge loophole, again, that you do not have to step aside when you're dealing with a matter that applies generally. And again, 99% of decisions apply generally. So the screens are a smoke screen that hide conflicts of interest. They do not stop them or prevent them in any way.
And do you have concerns with the fact that this screen is basically set up on the basis of just trust the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council? Just trust them, even though they answer to the Prime Minister, that they serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister?
Yes, very much so. Anyone who's serving at your pleasure is not independent. And I was very disappointed to hear Ethics Commissioner Conrad von Finkenstein claim that they share the same interest as the Prime Minister in terms of keeping him away from conflicts of interest. Actually, the interest they share with the Prime Minister is covering up conflicts of interest. And these ethics screens, again, were created by the Ethics Commissioner. It's a loophole that's not in the Act. It's created by the Commissioner. And tomorrow, Conrad von Finkenstein could require full transparency under that ethics screen of every single time that Mr. Carney is actually stepping aside from a decision. And he could just impose that as part of the conditions of the screen. It's really his screen. He sets the terms of it. And what it would show, if there was transparency, is that 99% of the time, Mr. Carney is participating in decisions that affect his financial interests because the law allows for that, as the Ethics Commissioner acknowledged when he was testifying.
Now, Mr. Carney has said, well, there's nothing to see here. Everything is on the up and up because I've put my assets into a blind trust. But when we look, for example, at the funds in which he has future bonus pay awaiting for him. What good is a blind trust when the Prime Minister is hardly blind to policy decisions that will impact upon his future bonus pay?
Very quick response.
Yeah,
please.
blind trusts are not blind at all. You choose the trustee. You also can give them initial instructions. They can give you regular updates, and you know what you put in the blind trust. But even further, for Prime Minister Carney, the holdings are actually outside the blind trust. All the Brookfield conglomerate, the 103 companies, he knows that he owns them. He knows that he owns stock options in Brookfield until 2033. So he knows he's in a financial conflict of interest, and there's nothing preventing or prohibiting or penalizing it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Church, starting for 6 minutes, and I understand you're sharing your time with Mr. Sane. I'm going to give you a little extra time, too, because we went 30 seconds over on that one. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Conacher. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you see the difference between and I guess the nature of having both a Conflict of Interest Act as well as a code for members, and whether it is useful to have two separate systems governing conflict of interest for members of the government and members of Parliament?
A lot of the provinces have one law, but they have special provisions for the members of the executive, cabinet ministers, their staff, and top government officials, all cabinet appointees. So even if you combine it into one law, you should have a sliding scale of accountability and standards. The more power you have to make decisions, then the higher standards you should have to meet. And so it doesn't really matter whether you have two laws or one. We also have a Prime Minister's code, separate. There used to be a code that covered cabinet ministers, the Prime Minister, et cetera. And when the Act was created in 2006, some of the key rules from the code were taken out and put in the Prime Minister's code, which has been maintained since. And they're very strong rules. You can't be in an apparent conflict of interest under that code. And it's required. There are no exceptions. There's no general application loophole like there is in the Act. But it's enforced by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Ministers have not been enforcing it. In fact, Mr. Carney, the current version of the code up on the Prime Minister's website is from 2015 and signed by Justin Trudeau. So Mr. Carney has not even reenacted the code in his own name. Maybe he's planning to weaken it or cancel it. But those rules from the PM code should be just added to the Act. Any Prime Minister would do that if they were serious about having ethical standards that were enforceable for all top government officials.
So you mentioned an apparent conflict of interest, and I'm curious because of the approach that you've described in your preference for the type of reforms that should be made. Can you describe to me what you see as the difference between an apparent conflict of interest and, I suppose, an actual conflict of interest? What's the distinction between the two?
Well, it's well defined. It's been defined by the Supreme Court of Canada and also the Parker Commission and the Starr-Sharp Report. Parker Commission in 1987, the Starr-Sharp Report in 1984, both of which recommended that office holders be required to sell their investments and also as the only way of actually getting rid of a financial conflict of interest, and also both recommended that blind trusts should be prohibited because they were just a sham facade. Their definitions, it's essentially known for judges as reasonable apprehension of bias for an apparent conflict of interest. A reasonable person, reasonably well informed, would perceive that there is a conflict of interest.
So is it your position then that any public office holder should divest themselves of the entirety of their financial investments?
Yes.
It's the only way to solve financial conflicts of interest. Any other solution will leave a financial conflict of interest, leave the system open. The Conservatives proposed sell the investments and then give the money to a trustee who would then reinvest them. But then you would still be invested, and the trustee could easily communicate to you even if it was prohibited. It's just better to sell them. That's what was recommended in 84 and 87 by federal government task force.
Talking about all types of financial investments? Are you talking about RRSPs? Are you talking about mutual funds?
If those are going to be something where you have any role in directing them, or you know about what the investments are, then yes, you would have to do that. And Conrad von Finkenstein said, that's going to cause a huge tax hit or tax implications. Well, the better way to solve that is to give exemptions from those tax hits for people who enter public office. That would actually be an incentive to become and serve the public. But as long as you allow financial investments, you are allowing financial conflicts of interest. There is no other way of stopping it. And that's why it was recommended in 84 and 87 as the solution.
Mr. Conacher, how do you reconcile that with the act, the purpose of the act, which actually specifically delineates that part of the reason for having this conflict of interest regime is to encourage experienced and competent persons to seek public office and especially to facilitate the interchange between the public and private sector? How do you balance those objectives of the act with a position that would ask everyone who seeks public office to relinquish all of their financial investments?
Preventing conflicts of interest is paramount, because if you don't, you are allowing private interest to trump the public interest, and you are allowing corruption. The Supreme Court of Canada has said if a Conflict of Interest Act and other similar laws are not enforced strictly and strongly, we are not a democracy. So that's the priority. You can facilitate and actually incent competent people who, lots of competent people are not wealthy, but the ones who are can still come into public office, and it would actually be an incentive because they could cash in their investments without a capital gains tax or with a reduced tax on that, put their money into GICs and government bonds, earn a fixed rate of interest with no conflict of interest financially while they serve the public. These people are paid in the top 1% to 5% of salaries in the country. They have one of the best benefits and pension plans. How greedy are they? Do they really want to serve the public? If so, you have to leave your financial interests behind. Cut ties to businesses, not just by leaving boards, but by cutting ties, actually, your financial ties, because financial conflict interest is the most serious type of conflict of interest. And this law has to prevent them and prohibit them and penalize them. Otherwise, we are not a democracy. That's what the Supreme Court has said in several rulings.
Got 20 seconds left of the 6.5 minutes.
I have a very concern the way Mr. Duffy spoke in the beginning when he said the Liberals should not be looking at the points. Why are you picking on one party when there are members of the other parties are sitting here? It seems to you have a very biased opinion before even you start as a witness.
Need a quick response to that, Mr. Don.
I watched the first two hearings and saw the questions asked by the various sides, and that's why I expressed what I expressed, hoping that you will open your minds to the fact that this Act currently allows unethical, corrupt behavior. And if you support it the way it is now, you are supporting that should be allowed. And I heard prepared questions and prepared statements. I'm hoping you're opening your minds to actual changing this Act, finally.
Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Okay, Mr. Thériault, 6 minutes.
Mr. Thériault, you have 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Conacher, one of the pillars of my political engagement is to bring ethics into politics and not the other way around. And so I think that we can agree on that. There are a lot of things that I find tiring, and you might agree with me that ethics requires more energy than law. Often we'll say that it's not because it's legal that it's moral. So as members of Parliament, we need to review the Conflict of Interest Act, and this is serious work that needs to be done. Now, the first thing that I find tiring in what the Conflict of Interest Commissioner stated is that he said that we need to support public office holders so that the most qualified are able to work for the public service. I don't think that that's of primary importance. I think that we need to start by defining criteria so that there is no appearance even of conflict of interest, no conflict of interest, because we're talking about people's trust toward public institutions. Now, if somebody coming from the private sector is more competent than somebody who isn't rich, who's not coming from the private sector, I don't think so. I think that that's a posture that shouldn't exist. I think that's quite secondary, and I would like to know what you think of that.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, really I would remove the other purposes from the Act because they contradict what the Act is entitled, Conflict of Interest Act. It's supposed to prevent conflicts of interest. And the Supreme Court standard is that they have to be prevented to the point where the public not only perceives that the whole system has integrity, but that it actually has integrity. And if you, as unfortunately the current ethics commissioner and past ethics commissioners, but especially the current ethics commissioner, Von Finkenstein, if you focus on facilitating people with big business interests and investments entering public service as really the main focus that he's focused on, and ignore that the purpose of the Act is preventing, prohibiting, and penalizing conflicts of interest, then you're essentially facilitating unethical behavior and that will corrupt policymaking. And so this Act is the Conflict of Interest Act. If it doesn't prevent, prohibit, and penalize conflicts of interest, then just get rid of it. 99% of the time it doesn't do that now. It's pretty much useless. It's a sad joke. Fulfill that purpose first, and if you need to facilitate people getting into business other ways, do it, but never in a way that sacrifices preventing, prohibiting, and penalizing conflicts of interest.
Oui, ça c'est un aspect.
Yes, that is something that I find tiring, that we're claiming that there are no conflicts of interest when we're talking about a general application. We're talking about Mr. Carney here, but that's just one case among others. This is a never-seen situation. There has never been such a significant case, and I don't want to come back on the examples that have been given, but this is a case that needs to be studied. Do you not think that there are certain profiles that are not compatible with being a prime minister?
Yes, we don't actually know whether we've had a situation like this in the past because there was even more secrecy before. Certainly Paul Martin owned a shipping company and had many other investments, and we don't know the extent of them. But we do know the extent to some degree in this situation. And when it's the Prime Minister, you have another problem, which is all cabinet ministers and all cabinet appointees and staff serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. And so when they have these conflicts of interest, does the cabinet not share those conflicts of interest also? And how do you escape them? Again, that's why the only solution is divestment, actual divestment, not these sham blind trusts that are not blind and ethics smokescreens that just hide conflicts and don't prevent them. And so, for the Prime Minister, it's even more important because of the Prime Minister's power over other public office holders, who, again, all serve at the Prime Minister's pleasure.
Il s'agit pas ici.
Here, we're not only focusing on the Prime Minister. He has been elected, but he was elected and in a system where there is legislation with a bunch of loopholes. We don't want this to happen again. There needs to be a choice. Either you become a Prime Minister or you don't, where you wouldn't find yourself in this situation with conflict of interest. In this case, he has Brookfield, there's C5, and we have to rebuild Canada because of the tariff wars. And once we deal with CUSMA, there's no longer an issue. And so these investments just so happen to benefit him. So the blind trust, he might not know how much he has to gain, but he knows that he will be making gains. So is that screen sufficient? And if not, what would be sufficient? Should there be the commissioner's office that follows up periodically on the way that the two people under Mr. Carney manage that ethical screen?
I need a quick response, Mr. Conacher.
That tomorrow the ethics commissioner could say full transparency about how this ethics smoke screen is working. And every time you're stepping aside, you have to disclose it, which is what the Act says and requires. And then get rid of the smokescreen and let's have transparency. What it's going to show is it's going to show that the general application and broad class of persons loopholes mean that Mr. Carney is never stepping aside. He's taking part in all sorts of decisions that affect Brookfield and other companies he's invested in.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, Monsieur Thériault. That completes our first round. We're going to go to the second round. I am sticking on time. We're going to start with Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes, followed by Mr. Sarre, but we are going to be on time for each line of questioning. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Monsieur Hardy.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Conacher, for being with us. 32 years dedicated to ethics. I think that's very honorable. I'll start with my first question. Do you believe that the Prime Minister's investments are causing an ethical problem? I think that I know the answer, but I would like to hear you speak to this ethical issue.
Votre question encore, parce que
Can you please repeat the question?
ne fait pas rien.
My earpiece wasn't working. Do you believe that the Prime Minister is in a clear conflict of interest, whether it be appeared or a real conflict of interest?
Prime Minister, pretty much any time he's making a decision that affects businesses in Canada, is in a financial conflict of interest.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on a présentement une...
Do you believe that we have a structure in place in order to deal with such a level of a conflict of interest? Do you believe that the Ethics Commissioner is sufficiently equipped to deal with this unforeseen situation?
No, the Ethics Commissioner has recommended expanding the number of secret investments you can have. He views an investment in an ETF, because you don't control it, to not be a financial conflict of interest. Of course it is. Just because you don't control it, you know what it's invested in. An ETF can be industry specific, so can a mutual fund. And he wants to allow those to be invested. He also wants to expand the broad class of persons loophole to match what it is in the MP code. Both of those are going to weaken the Act and make it even more possible to participate in decisions when you have a financial conflict of interest and to have secret investments that you know about, the public doesn't know about, that cause financial conflicts of interest. And he's saying, when you're making a general decision, you're not in a conflict of interest because it's not about one company. Yes, it is, because it's about your investments, and you could profit from that decision. So his attitude is negligently weak, unfortunately, concerning conflicts of interest, and he enforces the Conflict of Interest Act.
Donc, si on s'en va vers ce thinking-là...
If we use such thinking, then, do you believe that for the first time we are opening the door to interests that are beyond Canadians' interests? People might join politics in order to enrich themselves instead of attracting people who are devoted to Canadians and to the provinces and territories and making things better. Is this a loophole that is being created, a problem created?
And hopefully the committee will look at the entire list of dirty dozen loopholes and close them all, and also strengthen enforcement in key ways. And the penalties. There are 0 penalties. The Ethics Commissioner has recommended a maximum $3,000 fine. That's meaningless to most of these people that the Act covers are making $220,000 plus. A maximum $3,000 fine is not going to discourage anyone.
Je suis content que vous alliez là parce que c'était ma prochaine question.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was my next question. If I am found to be in a conflict of interest, then it's a tap on the wrist, basically. Nothing compared to the money that I would have made. And so do you believe that the legislation needs to be more stringent? For example, if you made money on the backs of Canadians, well, not only will you have to pay that back, but perhaps there should be a percentage applied. But we need to be more strict.
The laws across Canada for parking illegally are more clear and effective, and the fines are higher. And parking illegally almost never causes a problem, except when you're in front of a hydrant and there's a fire, and then your windows get broken by the firefighters. But the laws for parking illegally across Canada are stricter, stronger, and the penalties are higher for violating them than for violating this law, even though it's one of the most important laws protecting democratic good government in Canada. That's why I call it a sad joke of a law. And it also doesn't apply 99% of the time. So it's almost impossibly in a conflict of interest. And when you're caught, you get a report saying you're in a conflict of interest. I mean, there has to be a sliding scale of penalties that are mandatory and go up and up as the more power you have to really discourage these violations. But also all the loopholes have to be closed. If apparent conflicts of interest was added to the Act, it would be meaningless because you're still allowed to be in an apparent conflict of interest 99% of the time. So unless you close that general application broad class of persons loopholes, you are doing nothing to change the status quo that allows for unethical, corrupt behavior.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, Mr. Hardy. And as a former firefighter, there were lots of times when I wanted to break the glass of cars that were parked in front of a hydro or a water main. Never did, though. Mr. Sarri, go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, et merci beaucoup pour votre.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate you being here with us today. It was very interesting to talk about parking legislation, and people don't follow that and don't follow lanes for buses. And anyway, moving on, I heard your testimony, and we talked about removing the appearance of a conflict of interest. Can you please respond by yes or no? Can we eliminate the appearance of a conflict of interest?
L'apparence de conflit d'intérêt.
The appearance of a conflict of interest.
Perception standard, so it is subjective. But you do have an enforcer of the law who would be making the decision as to what a reasonable person, reasonably well-informed, would view, how they would view the situation. And so the ethics commissioner would be the one drawing the line. And it does exist in British Columbia as a standard in their Conflict of Interest Act for members of the BC legislature. But
mais c'est une norme ou une décision qui...
Yes, but this comes with a perception, and you mentioned this. I would like to come back to the language that we're using, because we're in technicalities and you are an expert in the field. We talked about the exception of general application rules, and it's often used as a loophole. So we can look at financial interests, but you're an expert. So what language would be operational and less subjective? What could be used instead?
Est-ce que je peux...
Nothing.
Une seconde, on a... Oui.
This is not working. This is not working.
Okay.
Peut-être quelqu'un
I'm
vient
getting
de-
We're going to take a
nothing.
time out here. We'll figure out
I'm having
what's
difficulty
going on.
even just hearing.
Got the technician. J'ai arrêté le temps, Monsieur Sarré.
I stopped your time, Mr. Sari.
Okay, okay. So we're just going to make sure that everything is working.
Oh, it just so happens that as he's cooking, there's a tech issue.
Si tu peux, on peut
Je veux faire un petit test, OK?
un peu.
Let's do a little sound test here. Hello, Mr. Conacher. Can you hear me correctly? Can you hear me well? I think that things are working better now. Mr. Sari, I did stop your time at 3 minutes. I'm sharing my time with Ms. Lapointe, so I want to be able to ask my question and then I'll give her the rest of my time. I had Ms. Lapointe, who was last on the speaking list, so then we won't split the time. So there were general application measures, and that is often seen as a loophole, as you mentioned. And so what wording could we use that would be precise and operational? What would you recommend so that we could no longer neutralize the definition of different investments?
Well, with regard to general application loophole, certainly if you have any kind of financial interest, you should not be able to participate in a decision-making process, even if it does apply generally. So again, that would be a solid line to draw that would improve things greatly. But again, divestment of investments is the real way to solve that problem. If you have an interest with a broad class of persons and entities, you could define the list there. So obviously, taxes are changed, and taxes apply to everybody, income taxes, some other taxes. So that could be one of the defined things where you're allowed to participate. But if you had a specific interest, specific financial interest or other type of private interest that would in any way distinguish or have a significant effect for you beyond what it would affect an average person, then that would be another line that could be added to those provisions to narrow them down so that the law applies more than just 1% of the time.
Je peux vous donner un exemple qui pourrait être...
I could give you an example that could interest Canadians. For example, the prime rate. Most Canadians have RRSPs, and I know that most of them have RRSPs, so they know what they've invested in, they know the companies, and so they would have to divest from their RRSPs, if I understood you correctly. I don't think that many people would seek to be elected if that were the case.
Well, they would if they had an exemption from the tax implications of doing that. And then they could invest in GICs, government bonds, for while the time period they're serving the public, which would get them a fixed percentage return. And then they could return to having their financial interests that are specific to them after they leave. I don't see any problem with that. If good people want to serve the public, they should be happy to leave while they're serving the public their financial conflicts of interest and set them aside effectively. If not, then they're essentially saying, I want to have the opportunity, which the Act currently allows, to profit from my decision-making and my role as a person serving the public. I want to serve myself just as much. You don't want people like that in office. You want good people who want to serve the public.
Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, Monsieur Sarret.
Thank you, Mr. Sari. We have 15 minutes left. Mr. Thériault, if you would like 5 minutes for your questions, and then followed by the Conservatives and the Liberals. The floor is yours. Recusal. Let's say that it happens 1% of the time. Recusal itself, in the case of the ethics screen that the commissioner implemented, so it's managed by the clerk of the Privy Council, chief of staff, that recusal is not the same recusal of a simple minister. We're talking about the prime minister here who has hired these people. Do we really believe that people around the table are going to make a decision that goes against the interest of the prime minister? It's problematic. It's lacking. A minister might have a conflict of interest because they have a company that participated in a call for tender or made a submission, but the prime minister is in the room. And if he believes that there is a conflict of interest, and to protect from the appearance of a conflict of interest, well, it won't happen. But in this case, we're talking about the person who makes all decisions, all political decisions. He just arrived, and he just implemented a whole hallway of potential conflict of interest. Should we not be more stringent regarding the position of Prime Minister. What is recusal even worth?
Yes, it is a difficult problem when it is the Prime Minister because of the number of people that serve at the Prime Minister's pleasure. And even if the Prime Minister recused himself, people would know what his interest is, mostly because of the disclosure. And would they go against him? They're in a conflict of interest when doing so because they serve at his pleasure, which means serving to please him. He's the boss in the situation. And hopefully sometime in the future, we'll be able to say she's the boss. So that's why, again, the solution with investments is actual divestment, selling them. Anything less, you leave this situation where conflicts of interest are allowed, legalized, including the worst kind, financial conflicts of interest, through the decision-making process, and that's going to taint it. And just if I can say as an aside, I'm very surprised that Mr. Carney has created this situation. He could have cashed out his investments. He would have still had millions. He would be fine for the rest of his life, invest in GICs and government bonds. And instead, he's created a situation where pretty much every week, someone in the House can stand up and ask, did you participate in this decision? Because you have an interest in it. And why would he want every single policy and decision that he's making be tainted by this when he could have easily removed the problem in the only effective way that it can be removed, as again was recommended by a federal government task force in 84 and in 87 and ignored ever since.
Oui, vous parlez de...
You talked about the Parker Commission and the Star and Sharp Task Force. Why do you believe that we didn't follow those recommendations? Why did we become more permissive over time?
I can only guess that it was like, well, good people are wealthy people. Wealthy people are good people. We want them in office, and so we have to facilitate them coming into office. And why would we think about some system like giving them a tax break to get rid of their financial conflict? Let's just let them have the financial conflict interest. Keep it secret initially. Now it's disclosed, but it's still there. Design the act so that they can do whatever they want still. What can I say? Politicians write the rules for themselves. They wrote rules that work for themselves, where they can profit from their decisions. And no party has stood up and said, stop it for everyone, because it has to be also for opposition party leaders who are almost as powerful in a minority government, can introduce bills that can pass, because opposition parties hold the majority of seats in a minority parliament. It has to be on a sliding scale, but you have to, for everyone, remove these financial conflicts of interest if they have any decision-making power at all. And I don't know. Again, you would not be able to find out the discussions as to why these loopholes have been left open since 1984.
Thank you.
Because it's, I guess cabinet minutes would be disclosed now. 30 years have passed, but they wouldn't give the details again as to why.
Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, M. Thériault. C'est 5 minutes. C'est complet. Oui. Mr. Majumdar, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Sir, I sense your frustration, and in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you some quick questions, if that's okay, for some clarity. You've raised a lot here. When Prime Minister Carney set up his blind trust, he knew exactly what went in it, correct? And it's unlikely the assets that went into the blind trust in such a short period of time have changed significantly, correct?
Ethics Commissioner von Finkenstein acknowledged that most trustees will not change the holdings. So I agree with that. They won't. And even if they did, they're going to be investing in big businesses in Canada, and you're going to know they're investing in big business Canada. I mean, we have conglomerates of industry sectors that are dominated by big businesses, and you're going to be invested in them because that's what everyone invests in Canada.
I spent some time in the investment world before I put my name on a ballot. He co-led efforts to raise billions of dollars of capital for these funds, correct? Yes. Okay. Now, the holdings in these funds have not been disclosed to the public, correct?
That's right. Not all the details.
That's remarkable. But the Prime Minister He knows what's in them, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now let me just try and get a sense of this. This isn't some sort of middle-class holdings. These aren't modest savings of somebody who is making their way through the world. These are millions of dollars to our best estimation, correct?
Yes, according to the best estimate of including the value of the stock options.
And would you say the Prime Minister is entitled to future carried interest payments based on the performance of those funds, correct?
I wouldn't say the infamous phrase that he's entitled to his entitlements, but yes, he is entitled to that and to the value of the stock options when they eventually mature in 2033, 2034.
It's a remarkable throwback. I appreciate that very much, sir. Let me ask this. In New York, when the Prime Minister was there just last week, he met with a variety of investment managers, all who are implicated in funds that he holds. That places him in a pretty precarious position of conflict, correct?
Yes.
Now, if it's highly likely that Mark Carney's Liberal government has made or will make public policy decisions that will impact the success of the holdings in these funds, Canada is at risk of entering a massive conflict of interest scenario, correct?
Canada's policymaking process, yes, because of the central role of the Prime Minister, who is the boss over all policymaking processes in the end.
So, Mr. Conacher, shouldn't the Prime Minister be absolutely required to disclose the assets that exist within these funds?
Yes, there should be full disclosure, but it doesn't. It adds a bit of transparency, but it doesn't resolve the conflict of interest. Transparency is transparency, and removing a conflict of interest is removing a conflict of interest. The one does not do the other.
You know, it's a devastating indictment that you've laid out here in terms of the risk that the Prime Minister's in. Have you, in your research, because it's very well documented, have you been able to identify another Prime Minister who might have been anywhere remotely close to this level of conflict?
The only one we know the details about, because there was not disclosure of investments until the Act came into effect, is Prime Minister Paul Martin with his shipping company and other investments. But we did not know the details. We just knew for sure about the shipping company, and it was a conglomerate itself. But otherwise, no. Again, because of secrecy in the past, we don't know of any Prime Minister being in this kind of position.
I appreciate that. Well, listen, let me thank you for your testimony today. Let me thank you for your riveting honesty and for your clarion call for accountability and transparency, and something that obviously poses a grave risk to the integrity of our government. Thank you very much, Mr. Conacher.
Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. Madame Lapointe, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Lapointe, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our committee, Mr. Conacher. It's a pleasure to meet you. In 2020, you stated that blind trusts should be banned. You stated it again earlier, and that these ethics screens should also be prohibited. I understand that some of your concerns had to do with potential conflict of interest that could occur. And a few weeks ago, the Ethics Commissioner stated that such measures could dissuade people from seeking public office, specifically those coming from the private sector. Do you share his concern? You seem to be saying that good people, and I'm coming back to what you said here, that good people that want to join the public service shouldn't come from the private sector.
Sorry, I didn't catch the end. Good people, no, I think good people, more good people would be encouraged to enter politics if they knew that the ethics standards across the board were strong for everyone, because they would then, knowing that conflicts of interest are prevented, prohibited, and penalized, and therefore discouraged, know that they wouldn't be tainted as being guilty by association with some other public office holder who is there to serve themselves and is caught and exposed. And again, I think it's entirely possible through tax breaks to actually create an incentive for people who are wealthy and have investments to enter the public service. Just give them a tax break for serving the public on the capital gains that they have from their investments, and that would be a great financial windfall for someone entering the public service. And then, again, invest in GICs, government bonds, earn a fixed rate of interest while you're here, serve the public, and then leave when you leave and go back to serving yourself.
Par rapport, vous avez dit tantôt la perception.
You mentioned earlier being subjective, and I come from a family that had businesses. You're saying that if I have a family business, that I should sell it off, and then you start at zero once you leave the public office. I find that very difficult, that you're suggesting that everyone has bad intentions as soon as they seek to be elected.
I'm sorry, I've never said that everyone has bad intentions. What I've said is you need to have a system that prevents, prohibits, and penalizes conflicts of interest. A system that the public will have confidence, perceives that it has integrity and actually has integrity. There would be an exception. Thank you for that, pointing this out. As the Parker Commission set out, for a family business, no, you would not have to sell a family business, but you would have to recuse yourself whenever you're in the appearance of a conflict of interest concerning that family business, with no exception, no general application exception, no broad class of persons exception. That's what Justice Parker recommended, because, of course, you can't penalize your entire family by forcing the sale of a family business just because you've decided to enter a public service. But otherwise, in terms of investments in shares and other financial instruments, the rule should be a divestment, again, as the two federal government task forces that have been set up to look at this issue in the last 40 years both recommended.
Merci. Ben, je vais continuer un peu là-dessus parce que je crois.
I believe that the House of Commons is more valuable when it includes people from different backgrounds and different experiences. If we want to attract this variety of people, well, we need to have ways to do that. Now, with all of the experience that you have, 32 years of experience, what country would you look to for conflict of interest rules that we could examine?
Actually, it's to international standards. As I mentioned, politicians write the rules for themselves worldwide and generally have written rules that facilitate this kind of financial conflicts of interest. But the international standards that Canada signed on to under the United Nations Convention Against Corruption state that conflicts of interest need to be prohibited, prevented, and penalized. So you don't have a law that does that now. You know about it. MPs have known about it for 28 years, first time it presented on this. No one's done anything about it. And you look at the polls that show that only about 20% of Canadians trust politicians, you shouldn't wonder why. You know a law allows for financial conflicts of interest and unethical activities. All the federal parties have known about it for 28 years in detail, and they have not closed any of the loopholes. In fact, they've increased the loopholes. Why would the public trust politicians when they know that they're
on avait
doing these
suggéré
kind
la
of
Tanzanie.
We had heard Tanzania suggested. Is that not a country that comes to mind?
There are some countries that have put in place certain standards, but not the complete and not very specifically focused on the loopholes that are in our law, which are specifically designed, this idea of the ethics screens and things like that. Those are Canadian creations. And so the reforms that we need to implement in Canada need to be designed to close the specific dirty dozen loopholes in our law.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, Madame Lapointe. Mr. Conacher, I have one question, and it relates to something that Mr. Majumdar asked, and I can only cite this example because over a period of a week, the Prime Minister said he had met with institutional investors, investment bankers, and community, both in New York and London. Now, as you are aware, the Prime Minister has 103 declared conflicts of interest. He was asked who he met with, but he was rather evasive in that response. Do you believe that Canadians have the right to know, given the scope and scale of the conflicts of interest that the Prime Minister has declared, that Canadians have the right to know who he met with, the reasons why, and for what reason? Do you think that?
Yes, even if there weren't these scope of conflicts of interest, I think that the public has a right to know what public officials are doing on the job, including who they're communicating with in detail. But especially when you have financial conflicts of interest, which again are the worst type of conflict of interest, that you need full transparency. And I'd suggested as well for the ethics screen how much more transparency could be added tomorrow by the ethics commissioner if the ethics commissioner was taking the issue of financial conflicts of interest seriously.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conacher. That concludes our first hour of testimony. I want to thank you for being here today. We're going to suspend briefly. I understand Mr. Stedman is online and ready to go. And I see our other witness is here as well. So we're going to suspend for a couple of minutes and prepare for the second panel. Thank you.
Okay. We got something we can watch in the meantime. We won't catch it all, but we will. 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I'm responding today to the news that Premier Danielle Smith has been forced to set up a government corporation to build a pipeline because Mark Carney and the Liberals have scared away all of the private businesses that normally build pipelines with their own money. While Canadian pipeline company Enbridge builds 2 pipelines in the United States of America, and TransCanada Pipelines is investing $8.5 billion building projects, again in the United States of America. And Imperial Oil shuts down its Calgary office, killing 900 jobs. No major private company is willing to build pipelines to ship oil under this Liberal government in Canada. Why? Because Carney and the Liberals have kept in place their laws that ban increased production, pipeline construction, and shipping of oil off the northwest BC coast. These projects should be built by private investors because they are wildly profitable. They should be money-making projects for both the industry and paying taxes into the government. Instead, after a decade of Liberals and under the weak, incompetent leadership of Mark Carney, business is losing money, and taxpayers have to bail them out. It's the simple thing for Mark Carney to do is get out of the way. Get out of the way. That is literally the only thing Mark Carney needs to do to get pipelines built in Canada. I'm going to say that one more time because we have massively overcomplicated this. Mark Carney needs to do one thing for pipelines to get built. Get out of the way. We have trillions of dollars of investment that is waiting to build resource projects in Canada. We have more workers than jobs who are happy to do the work. We have businesses headquartered right in Calgary, Alberta, that have been building pipelines for literally a century. All they need is permission. Who is denying that permission? The federal government. Hence, get out of the way. Let our pipeliners build pipelines. We don't need another office. We don't need another press conference. We don't need another law, another regulation, another set of bureaucrats to meet. We don't need a committee to talk about all the things that can't be done. We just need Mark Carney and the Liberals to repeal their anti-development laws and taxes and get out of the way. So that's what Conservatives are calling for. Let's get out of the way and get building.
What is your official stance on the ostriches in British Columbia and the culling order that they are facing?
Really incredible that the Liberals have caused so much. Because of the Liberal incompetence, we're in this mess. And when you have an incompetent government, you have messes like the inflation crisis, like the crime crisis, like the border crisis, like the investment crisis, like the fastest shrinking economy in the entire G7. When you have an incompetent government, you get lots of these messes.
Wait, on the ostriches, sir. Sir, you didn't say what your stance is on the ostriches.
This lady.
Why won't you answer your stance on the ostriches?
I just did. I said the Liberals are incompetent. That's my stance.
Do you support the culling order?
Can I just...
Can we get your reaction to the new lumber tariffs?
Yes. Well, first of all, our hearts go out to the loggers, the mill workers, and the mill towns that are once again facing layoffs and job loss. Here we are 6 months after Mark Carney promised he was going to negotiate a win with the Americans. Lumber tariffs have more than doubled, and they're rising again. While Mark Carney breaks his promise, puts his elbows down, and gets trampled on by foreign leaders, our workers lose their jobs. His weakness abroad costs Canadians here at home. We need to defend our lumber sector against these tariffs. We need also to get the government out of the way to start home building so that that lumber can be used building affordable homes for our youth. We need to give people hope. Our purpose as Conservatives is stronger take-home pay with bigger paychecks and a more affordable life for Canadians.
Last question. How do you explain to the voters in BC, who many of whom are not in favor of having a pipeline go through their province? How do you convince them that this is a good thing?
Well, British Columbians support pipelines overwhelmingly. Yes, British Columbians want pipelines built. It's Liberals that are standing in the way. Liberals are blocking pipelines. The only thing standing between a pipeline that starts in Hardisty, Alberta, and ends in the northwest BC coast is Mark Carney and the Liberals. It's the Liberal shipping ban that blocks shipping of oil off the west coast. It's the Liberal pipeline ban and C-69. It's the Liberal production cap that bans the industry from producing enough oil to put in the pipe. So when the federal government bans Albertans from producing enough oil to put in the pipe, and then bans British Columbians from shipping it out of the pipe, then obviously no private industry is going to want to build such a pipe. If Mark Carney and the Liberals were to do what I say, get out of the way, then we could get a pipeline that would create jobs for British Columbia steel workers, Indigenous people all across northwestern BC, and across the beautiful prairies of our country. This is an incredible opportunity. I hope that it's a pipeline that ships 1 million barrels a day. All we need is for Mark Carney to get out of the way. Thank you. All right, guys.
Okay. We're going back to ethics.
Conacher. That's nice. I think there are probably
let me
some
turn this
matters
up.
on which I will align with your other witnesses, including both Dr. Conacher and Dr. Turnbull. And there are some where I hope I have a different perspective to offer. Let me start by saying that I think every elected official needs to care about avoiding the perception of being in a conflict of interest. You know, it's no longer good enough to do good. You must, and I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone here this, be seen to be doing good. So what? Should the commissioner be given the power to investigate allegations of potential or apparent conflicts? Eventually, yes, is my opinion, but I think this should be a multi-step development. I would first like to see the Act amended so that it is clear the commissioner can and should be giving advice about potential and apparent conflicts. I think we need to establish some strong behavioral customs, and then we should revisit whether and how to enforce the avoidance of potential or apparent conflicts. So first, I think we have to socialize the new standard quite well. Advice now, enforcement later. This ability to give advice about compliance with the Act and about avoidance of conflicts, whether real, perceived, or potential, could certainly extend to candidates for public office. The Commissioner's office, I think, should be available for consultation with candidates, and parties should encourage, if not require, that candidates or serious candidates consult with the office. I do worry in making that recommendation about, overburdening the Commissioner's office without also providing that office with adequate resources. But I think the office should definitely be available for anyone seriously considering becoming a candidate or taking a position or an appointment. The Commissioner's office would be able to tell people what is and isn't covered in the ethics rules. but then also give them advice about how to get their affairs in order and, advice about what being seen to be doing good might look like for them in particular. I would hate to think that some people are becoming candidates or accepting positions without having their eyes wide open to the unique challenges of public life, which your previous witness explained quite a bit about. Speaking of candidates, I do think that the ability to give this kind of advice should also apply to leadership candidates, even if they don't currently hold a seat. Of course, the ethics commissioner should be expected to meet with them to discuss their obligations, and of course, those obligations should be at least the same as they are for elected officials currently under the Act. Should the rules for leaders be more onerous, though? I think that's probably the biggest question everyone has been trying to wrap their heads around lately. Are blind trusts good enough? Very much the theme of the previous hour. And this is where I think I might differ from your other witnesses. I certainly don't think that blind trusts are enough to make it so that a public office holder can no longer make decisions that they will benefit from. I think, as Dr. Conacher noted, that the only way to do that is to have no assets at all, and to do, as also Mr. Poilievre has suggested, which is to force all market assets to be liquidated, and then that resulting cash to then be put in a blind trust with an arm's length trustee to then reinvest. That's the only way the public office holder would not know what's going on. I think this should be an option, but I don't actually think it's an appropriate or suitable approach for every circumstance. Currently, we do have a very interesting case of a member, our prime minister, having options in a company that has an interest in basically every major industry of our economy. And depending on the potential value of those options, is someone really going to give them up for the privilege of taking on public office? I think that's a tough question, and we really don't have much data on it. As Dr. Conacher noted, we don't have anything like this in the past that we can point to. We haven't learned from anything similar. But my guess is that forcing the sale of assets, particularly a robust portfolio of assets or unique assets, might serve as a disincentive for people running for office.
No, it doesn't.
I think for me, the better route is to educate all candidates about what makes public service ethics different than other domains of ethics, so that they can understand what the risks are and make an informed choice about what kind of scrutiny might be coming their way if they take office with their assets in the order that they're currently ordered. Next, let me address the question of whether we should enhance transparency. My answer to this is always going to be yes, but I do think it has to be within reason. As a member of the general public, I don't need to know what a member's brother's father-in-law does for a living, but I do need to be reassured that the member knows they're not to make decisions that improperly benefit their brother's father-in-law. I need to be reassured that they have received adequate education about the expectations we have of them so that I can feel like it's okay to be angry with them and hold them accountable if they do the wrong thing.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you there. We're over the 5 minutes, Mr. Stedman. Maybe you can pick this up through the line of questioning.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Ms. Turnbull, welcome to committee. You have 5 minutes to address us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I would start by saying that ethics regulation, as you all know, is important and complicated work, and there is a lot of room for robust dialogue and disagreement about how ethics regime should be designed. There is no perfect way to do this. There is no way to rid the system entirely of ethical transgressions. There will always be debate about where the line is. And no matter how well crafted the rules are, there is no substitute for good judgment. An individual's own ethical compass is always going to be a much greater determinant of their actions than any code of conduct. When we create and revise conflict of interest and ethics rules for politicians and public office holders, the goal is obviously to protect the public and to protect the public interest. Those who occupy public office are also private citizens with interests of their own. We want to make sure that elected officials' private interests do not affect public policy and do not take precedence over the public interest. So we ask elected officials and public officials to accept certain rules and constraints and responsibilities to maintain a healthy and transparent separation between their public roles and their private interests. The specifics of these responsibilities are going to depend on the kind of role they play. For cabinet ministers, it's going to be different than for a backbencher. The ethics regime has been adapted over time, often in response to new events, new circumstances, new people. Sometimes there's controversy. You get a lot of media coverage. If there's a scandal that grips the public's attention, there's a sense that there must be something wrong in the rules, or there's some loophole that needs to be closed. Sometimes when there's smoke, there's fire. Not always. All public office holders have their own personal circumstances that interact with the ethics regime in unique ways. Some people have fairly straightforward financial portfolios and likely wouldn't need an ethical screen even if they held the highest public office. Other people have significant financial holdings, or they have had leadership roles in the private sector, which could result in the need for a more in-depth effort to separate out their public responsibilities and the private interests. Others still have relationships as opposed to financial circumstances that give rise to a sense of conflict of interest or potential impropriety of some kind. We tend to focus on finance when we talk about conflict of interest, but sometimes social circumstances can also cause the public to be concerned about whether or not people are acting appropriately. I'm going to try in a couple of minutes to address some of the issues that the committee has been talking about in recent days. First, I think I understand the concern about blind trusts. The problem, I think, is that the public office holder is not completely blind. You know what you own when the thing goes into a blind trust. The public is blind, though, because the specific circumstances of blind trusts and ethical screens are not available to them. They get the general, they don't get the specific. There are trade-offs, obviously, between the public's right to know and the individual's right to privacy when it comes to their financial holdings and that of their family. It's not a small thing. Overreach with respect to disclosure and asset management could deter some people from holding public office. I think that's important. I don't gloss over that. I think it's very important. It is important to remember that ethics regimes exist to enable people's participation in politics, not to make it impossible, not to make it undesirable.
It's $200,000 a year.
Access to political office, as you know better than I do, is important. We want to make sure that that's real. Questions have been raised about whether ethics rules should apply to leadership candidates. Leadership contests are run by political parties for the most part, as you know, with Elections Canada having an oversight role when it comes to the flow of money, because there's limits about what you can give, how much you can give, and who can give. Fine. In other words, this is not the Wild West. It's not totally lawless. I think that to expect leadership candidates to disclose their assets would be to place an undue burden on candidates who at that point are private citizens, unless they are elected or members of cabinet already, in which case they are subject already to an ethics regime. But as private citizens and as candidates alone, they have no power. They're not making decisions on behalf of the public. They're not directing finances. They're not doing any of that. So disclosure requirements at that point would have no public purpose and serve no public value. However, if you're looking for a loophole, and if that's the case, this sort of thing doesn't keep me awake at night. But if it does, there might be a loophole here, given the fact that opposition party leaders are not subject to an ethics regime in the event that they are not part of the executive. So if somebody is running for a leader of an opposition party, they win. If you're not the government, you're not subject to the Conflict of Interest Act. And so, to the extent that you want to worry about perhaps this person might become prime minister soon in the event that there is a defeat of the government and then there's a replacement by a new person, maybe that's a loophole. But yet the person would be subject to the Conflict of Interest Act in the event that they become a member of the executive. So I'm not stressed out about any of that. I'm going to stop because that's my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Turnbull, and it avoids me from stopping you, so I appreciate that. It's the worst job in the world when it comes to, especially when you're saying something as interesting as you are, and Mr. Stedman. I hate doing it, but I have to stay on time. Mr. Cooper, you're going to start us in the first 6-minute round. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Stedman, I want to ask you some questions about the Prime Minister's so-called ethics screen. This so-called ethics screen encompasses 103 different companies, including Brookfield, companies that engage in everything from energy to ports to transport to infrastructure to fishing, you name it. These companies are involved in all manner of activities that touch upon federal public policy and decisions that the Prime Minister could be involved in making. Are you aware of any ethics screen that has been put in place that is as vast as the one put in place in respect of Mr. Carney, given the vast number of potential conflicts of interest that he is involved in?
The easy answer, no. There's no way I've ever heard of anything quite this broad.
Thank you. This so-called ethics screen is being administered by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council. Given the large number of companies captured by the screen and the large number of potential conflicts of interest involving Mr. Carney, do you have any concerns about the practicability on a day-to-day basis of these two very busy people properly and effectively screening out conflicts of interest from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been quoted on this several times when the election was happening. I have no idea how they're going to be able to screen for all of these things and continue to do their job at the same time. I wonder if there's some sort of automated process that they have in place. I've said several times it would be nice to know more about how they're going to operationalize this actual screen. I don't think that we have any information about how they are actually managing to do this.
No transparency. And pursuant to the ethics screen, just to be clear, Mr. Carney may still participate in discussions and make decisions affecting these 103 companies on most matters, even where he stands to personally and financially benefit. Isn't that right?
That's correct. It's the disproportionate clause that comes into his screen that I've also commented on as being unique and something that we should learn more about. And I think that came up with your previous witness, too.
And speaking of the disproportionate clause, that is language that is not found in the Conflict of Interest Act, is it?
It is not in the Act, nope.
And it's not defined in the ethics screen, is it?
Not in the screen, no. It's the kind of thing that the trustees are, I suppose, supposed to figure out. It would be nice to know how they've defined it so that we could, as a public that's interested in knowing more, also
really going to be
play along.
It's going to be really left to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council to interpret on a case-by-case basis whether there is a disproportionate interest or not. Is that right?
That's my understanding, absolutely, yeah.
And so here we have an ethics screen that is unprecedented in scope, administered by two of the busiest people in government, making decisions as to what the Prime Minister sees and what he doesn't see based upon an ambiguous proportionality standard. In the face of all of that, what assurance do Canadians have that this so-called ethics screen is working?
Trust and faith. I'm not sure you have any sort of documented assurance in any way whatsoever. You just have to hope that we put someone in public office who acts with integrity at this point.
And so, just to pick up on that, you can't point to any tangible proof, documents, disclosure, public filings that would prove to Canadians that the screen is working. That just doesn't exist. There are no chances.
There's no evidence to suggest, we have no evidence demonstrating that there's actually been a decision made with respect to the screen, period. It's just not something that there's a public, reporting mechanism for.
Now, can you understand why Canadians would be skeptical about the effectiveness of the screen in light of all of the issues that you have identified, coupled with the fact that it is being administered by two people who answer to and are beholden to the Prime Minister, including his Chief of Staff?
I am equally skeptical. So, yes, I can understand why the public would be.
Now, you spoke about transparency, the need for the Prime Minister to, at the very least, be transparent about how the ethics screen is working on a day-to-day basis. Am I correct? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we've seen really no transparency. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And the Prime Minister just on the weekend met with investment leaders and business leaders in London and in New York. When he was asked, who did he meet with? What companies did they represent? He didn't provide an answer. So we don't know if these companies are connected to Brookfield or any of the other companies that are subject to the screen. We don't know anything about what those discussions are. Should Canadians be concerned about the Prime Minister not coming forward and disclosing that information? Shouldn't he?
There's no obligation to. The question is whether there should be a moral standard to do so. There's no legal standard to do so. It does raise the question of whether or not we could go back and meet with the commissioner and talk about whether this screen is robust enough and has enough detail in it about how it should be
in
implemented.
the interest of transparency, you spoke about transparency. I would submit, consistent with that, it would be the proper and correct thing to do for the Prime Minister to disclose that, wouldn't it be? That would be consistent with being transparent.
There's a moral argument to be made. I agree.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We have prochaine intervention et pour...
We have Mr. Sari next for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Turnbull. Thank you for your testimony. It was very interesting. Thank you to Dr. Sedman as well. I would like for us to talk about this total independence. Institutions need to have that real independence, the ability to have commissioners that are named. What appointment model should we have? A short list from different parties? What process should we have to choose our commissioner?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. This is a really interesting question because I think the ethics commissioner's role can very easily become mired in political and partisan back and forth and claims about whether someone has acted with integrity. Obviously, they can be highly political and partisan things. And so it's really good if there is some agreement among the parties about who the person is. And so I think it's good to have some agreement in terms of the qualifications that you want the person to have, and agreement among the party leaders about the role that the person will play. That way, the person isn't totally politicized in the event that they make a decision that some parties don't agree with.
Oui, parfois il y a des vacances par rapport à ce poste-là pour des raisons X et Y.
How could we, or are there mechanisms in other countries that we could apply? The interpreter regrets she missed the beginning of the question. I stopped your time. If you can repeat your question, please. The interpreter unfortunately missed the beginning of your question. No problem. We talked about appointments. Now we're going to talk about the interim measures when someone needs to be absent for a long period of time. How can such a person be replaced? Because if we have interim positions, how do we find someone who could replace the commissioner?
Okay, I understand that. And sometimes in other jurisdictions, including within Canada, sometimes at the provincial level, sometimes there is, you can have another person who is an agent of Parliament who is appointed on a kind of similar, the person is nonpartisan, the person holds certain credentials, whether they're a judge, whatever, and they might meet the credentials for another appointment as well. They can hold over for a period of time while you choose someone. We can do something like that. I wouldn't want to put a whole lot of emphasis on that and treat that too much as a solution in the event that this position is vacant. I think that the ethics commissioner holds a very important and specific role when it comes to judgment about how these sorts of matters are going to be dealt with, especially because it's not the law, right? Like sometimes we look at the importance of having a judge in this kind of role, but this is not about deciding whether there's legal threshold has been met. It's about judgment. It's about public trust. It's much more nuanced. And so I think that the choice of who plays this role is very important.
Dans vos travaux universitaires, vous...
In your university work, you talked about a robust application system for ethics. What do you think of the Conflict of Interest Act that we have currently in 2025? Do you have any suggestions for improvements?
Sure. Like, I don't necessarily think that including a whole bunch of things in the Act that aren't there already is going to solve all the problems. And I admit that when I was younger, when I started in all of this, and I wrote my PhD dissertation on conflict of interest and ethics regimes for members of Parliament, I think I really felt then that the more things that were enumerated, the more ethical everybody would be. And now I know that's wrong. Now I know that actually there's not much you can do to force somebody to do what they're not inclined to do. You can't force someone to be ethical. You can't force someone to make the kinds of decisions that the public is going to trust. It's a judgment call on that person's part. Of course, there are things like bribery, fraud, breach of trust that are in the conflict, that are in the criminal code. That's a different level. But ethics is specifically a kind of non-legal but very important space in the relationship between elected officials and the public.
J'ai une question.
I asked a question to the previous witness, and I would like to ask it to you. Eliminating the appearance of a conflict of interest, is this a goal that is attainable? If we want to have an ethics code, are we democratically open then to Canadians?
The piece around the appearance of conflict, I think, belongs in the code, not in the law. So those of us who spend a whole bunch of time thinking about the regulation of ethics can spend time distinguishing between soft and hard approaches to ethics regulation. A soft approach is a conflict of interest code where the language is often aspirational. We want public officials to achieve the highest ethical standards. Your behavior should be beyond reproach. You should be living at a kind of level that is above your typical citizen level, right? Like, it should be really beyond reproach because you have a very special responsibility in terms of protecting the public interest. Therefore, sometimes people talk about the smell test. That's kind of what's there, right? Your behavior should also always pass the smell test. Try enforcing that in the law. It's a different thing. I think that the appearance of conflict of interest is problematic. It can cause a trust problem with the public. There's reason to enumerate that in a code. Enumerating into a law starts to create problems in terms of back and forth around whether there's really an appearance. How do you like get into the legalities of that? If you're going to start fining people in terms of administrative monetary penalties, that's messy to me and it misses the point.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Turnbull. Merci, Monsieur Sarri. Mr. Thériault.
Thank you, Mr. Sarri. Mr. Thériault, you have 6 minutes. Professor Turnbull, does ethics require more than law?
Yes. Because I think the threshold around the public's expectation about what it means to be ethical is not going to be met by compliance with a law. The public expects more than that. And that's why we have ethics rules in the first place. We didn't always have an ethics regime. We didn't always have a code of conduct for members of parliament. That's just been in the last 20 years or so. I think that it's because sometimes even when people act in accordance with the law, there's a sense that, but yeah, it's still not right? Like, it's still not enough for the public to feel like I trust you with my money, I trust you with the policy decisions that are going to affect me and my family. And so it's very important, I think, that ethics and law are not the same thing.
We can say that it's not because something is legal that it's moral.
Sorry, I never try to talk over a witness, but her definition is completely flawed. That's exactly why you have laws in place that are, deemed either ethical or not ethical. Like, there's the whole argument behind, should you kill someone who kills someone? Like a murderer, should they get the death penalty? How is it teaching ethical behavior if we are also killing someone who has killed someone? Do you know what I mean? So her reasoning is flawed.
Ethically speaking, and this comes back to what Mr. Stedman said, it's not only about doing good, it's about the perception of doing good. And so what would we need to do in order to reach that goal? What would you propose? What can we do? Because you stated that it might not be with the legislation And so what would you propose? And if you can also answer this following question, what we have now, is it sufficient given the case that we mentioned about the Prime Minister?
So there has been a lot of attention, I think, paid to the Prime Minister's pre-political life. He comes to this role, it seems very quickly, right, where all of a sudden the former Prime Minister steps down, there's a leadership race, all of a sudden Prime Minister Carney is the Prime Minister, it happens very quickly. And the public didn't get, I think, a whole lot of time to get to know him necessarily, but what they are left with, what they know about, is his role in the private sector and the kinds of things that he did, the kinds of offices he held, and a little bit of information about what his financial holdings look like, and now he's had to put that in, kind of put that in public in a certain way. I don't necessarily know. I don't know that the ethics regime is not able to handle that. His case is unusual, yes, and the kinds of holdings he has, the kinds of positions he's held, of course those things are unusual. I suspect that's probably what contributed to his political success in the first place. But he's an unusual case where he's got a much longer list of things he has to recuse himself from, put up a screen about, put in a blind trust. He's in a bit of an unusual case. But the point of the ethics regime is to be able to enable his participation, as is anybody else who has been successful in the private sector.
Mais est-ce que c'est suffisant? Parce que
But is it enough? Because some experts have told us, for general application, there is no issue with the perception of conflict of interest or real conflict of interest. Is it enough? What should we do?
We think it's not enough. I mean, if the public has an issue with it, they'll let people know. I don't get the sense personally that there's a widespread sense that the Prime Minister is in public office for the wrong reason. If he really cared about money all that much, I suspect he would have stayed in the private sector. I suspect he's leaving money on the table by being in the role he's in.
Bon, c'est pas une question.
I haven't named him. I'm trying to talk about this as an objective case. But being a prime minister should require more than an average minister or member of parliament. It's easy for us to see a situation of a conflict of interest for an MP. They're not making decisions on behalf of the country, meeting with lobbyists throughout the world. And so should there not be even more transparency because this case is so particular? There's a difference between an MP, a minister, and a prime minister. Even in a situation where there's recusal, is it enough? What could we do? What more could we do? I know we could always talk about intentions and play politics with ethics, but I want us to do the opposite. And I need to know what we need to do. You seem to be saying that we won't be able to succeed, but I don't think the current legislation is enough. The proof is in the situation that we're seeing now, and it's beyond us.
Monsieur Thériault, les 6 minutes sont...
Monsieur Thériault, your 6 minutes are up. Perhaps we can come back to this at your next turn. I did ask a question.
Very brief response, Ms. Turnbull. I would appreciate that. Very brief.
Create ethics rules around individuals. Ever. That's not the point.
What?
Okay. Thank you. That completes our first round. Je m'excuse, Monsieur Thériault, mais c'est 6 minutes.
Apologies, Mr. Thériault. You did have a little bit more time.
Monsieur Hardy, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes for the second round. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Stedman and Dr. Turnbull. I'd like to come back to what my colleague was saying. in an answer, you mentioned that, and we're talking about the current case, that the Prime Minister should have just invested in the private sector. It would have been more beneficial for him than to come into the public sector. So that's in the case of somebody wanting to bring their knowledge and benefit their country. But could there be a potential case where the person knows that a lot of people will be losing money and our legislation is not able to deal with a situation like that? Is that something that could cause us some trouble if that were the case?
Si, exemple, dans le cas...
For example, if it's somebody who manages portfolios and knowing that a government is going to fall, they say, well, we need someone to protect our interests. Could that be a case that would be problematic because our legislation would not be able to counter such a case?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Do you mean somebody who the Prime Minister would be thinking of in terms of their private interests?
On pourrait voir les intérêts privés, parce que dans le cas que vous présentez...
In the case that you mentioned, you're talking about someone who wants to be Prime Minister, that they will be doing it with good intentions to make the country better. But could there not be a case where a person would be coming into politics not necessarily to make the country better, but to ensure that the people that they have business with don't lose money, and then they would be well positioned to do so, and that would put our country in peril a little bit?
So I think what we have to guard against that is disclosure. We do have, even though we don't necessarily require people to enumerate the exact dollar amounts of the stocks they hold, we don't necessarily get the nitty-gritty on everything. We do have a broad picture of what kinds of affiliations the person's had, where they've worked before. And that way the public has a way to say, look, it looks like this person is acting in the interests of a certain group, and we don't want that. And so that would create a political backlash.
On est un peu dans cette situation-là où est-ce qu'on sait, exemple, que...
Well, we know that the Prime Minister is meeting with people, but isn't telling us who he's meeting with, knowing that it could be a conflict of interest. Now, the Prime Minister does not have to share his holdings, and I agree with you, you've mentioned the public opinion. Our democracy is struggling because people do not trust our institutions. And so we need to do everything that we can to rebuild that trust. And I think that we should have access to this information. In the current case that we're looking at, last week or 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister was meeting with people, and it was a potential conflict of interest, but he didn't have to share it.
Point. And it's not, in that case, it's not so much about what's in the Prime Minister's blind trust or ethics screen. It's about who he's talking to and what conversations he might be having and whether he has more pull with those people and that sort of thing. And so I think it'd be interesting to be clear about what sort of offense we think that person might be engaging in that context, right? Like if he's talking to people who, so what? Like what offense do you think he's like? What possible bad thing could be happening?
On est d'accord ici qu'on doit clarifier ça.
We need to be able to clarify so that Canadians understand when it becomes a conflict, and we need safeguards that are clear in order to rebuild trust. Do you agree with that?
If in the event, for example, that the Prime Minister was having conversations with people with corporate entities that he had relationships with, and from an ethics perspective, the public has an interest in making sure that a public office holder doesn't do anything that benefits himself or benefits his friends or that sort of thing. And so the public would have an interest in knowing, is there any conversation that the Prime Minister is having that would somehow confer some unfair benefit on people he knows or he's worked with before? So it's important then for him to be transparent about who he's meeting with.
On est d'accord sur le fait qu'il devrait être transparent, il devrait dire ses avoirs.
I agree that he should be transparent and share his holdings and state who he's meeting with. We agree there. Now, brief question. I think that it was Dr. Stedman who mentioned, or Professor Stedman, who talked about candidates. should there be an ethical screen when you apply to be a candidate instead of waiting until later? So if you want to apply, here are the standards. Here's the ethical code that you need to respect before you put your face on a...
Please. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Saini, you're up next, sir, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Professor Turnbull, a lot has been talked about people not having faith in politicians. When we had the election 6 months ago, we had 4 leaders running for the office. Everybody knew what they were doing, what their interest is, how wealthy they are. Why would we now have an issue when Canadians overwhelmingly elected a person who they thought was fit to run the government?
Because there was no transparency.
Sorry,
prior.
are you talking about the Liberal leadership race? There were 4 candidates ultimately, and
the Prime Ministership after the election.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you ask me the question again? I thought you were talking about the Liberal leadership.
It was such a stupid question. She doesn't understand.
My question is that a lot has been talked that people don't have faith in our politicians. I am saying there were 4 people running to be the Prime Minister of the country. People know their background. People know how wealthy they are. They still went with a person they thought was the best to lead the country. Is there anything wrong with that?
Of course not. And people are going to vote the way they're going to vote. At the end of the day, I found in my own research about ethics and people's sense of what's ethical and what's not, it's not the things that I thought would bother people that actually bother them. Sometimes it's things like perks that politicians get that they don't. The fact that politicians at the end of the day get a taxi chit to get home, they don't get that. The fact that politicians have meals comp for them, they don't get that, even though they're struggling financially. The sorts of the sorts of ethical questions that sometimes the public have in their mind doesn't necessarily match up with the big conflict of interest questions that we're talking about today, even though those things are important. I am not convinced that the public is concerned heavily about the conflict of interest potential or the ethical holdings or the financial holdings of any of the party leaders.
Yes, we are. You are dense. This lady is so dense. Oh my God.
In your opinion, how can our government ensure that the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner officers have the necessary independence and resources to effectively hold public office accountable?
I don't think that there's necessarily a high public awareness about the role of the ethics commissioner and the way that office works. I strongly doubt that. I've never seen any evidence to suggest that the public is acutely aware of what the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner does. I think the public becomes more aware when there's a scandal, when there's a lot of media coverage around something. I think that to the extent that people start to ask questions about the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner and the appointment, it's important, I think, to show that there are specific credentials that that person should hold. It's not a political appointment. It's not something that the Prime Minister just says, okay, this is my friend and I trust that person and so they're going to be the ethics commissioner. There's a sense in which there is an actual set of credentials the person has to meet, and then they're judged against those things. I think that's probably what the public would see as trying to create, if they were trying to create a trust relationship with a commissioner, that's what it would be based on.
If there was a scandal, that there will be legal implication, there will be legal charges. So I don't believe what we are trying to accomplish has any conflict with that.
What? What's the question?
If there was a scandal and there were legal charges, do you mean under the Conflict of Interest Act?
Yes.
There is no penalty. There's no legal repercussion for that.
I think sometimes it's a strange thing for the public, because, again, to the extent that they're leaning into it at all, if the response, if you're talking about something that's so bad that it engages the criminal code, you're talking bribery, people paid attention. The last time there was a senator who was charged with a whole bunch of counts of, he wasn't found guilty of anything, but when it meets that kind of threshold for that kind of charge, the public pays attention. When there's something under the Conflict of Interest Act that's going, even if it's the worst case scenario, it's going to be reacted with an administrative monetary penalty, the public is not going to be super stressed out about that. And to the extent that they even know about it, they find out that somebody forgot to disclose their French villa, and so they were charged $250. Like, that makes the whole thing look ridiculous. I don't think that administrative monetary penalties are the way to make the public think that politicians are ethical. It's a weird space.
Thank you, Ms. Turnbull. Thank you, Mr. Sani. Monsieur Thériault, 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. Great. My questions will be for Professor Stedman. I figure you've been hearing me ask questions, and so you know what I'm interested in. You mentioned a case, and not everybody realizes or recognizes that this is a particular case. And one might think that the ethics screen is sufficient and that situations would be resolved by simply saying there is no conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict of interest when it's a situation of general application. Do you agree that there is no conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest when we're talking about general application for the Prime Minister? I'm not talking about a simple minister here, but for a Prime Minister. Do you agree?
No, the general application rule doesn't eliminate the very fact of a conflict of interest. It is a decision that the lawmakers have made with respect to where they want to draw the line of best fit between eliminating conflicts and not disincentivizing public service. Your only way, as was mentioned earlier, to eliminate conflicts entirely is to just not have assets that could put you in conflict. There's no other way. So a screen, to come back to the screens, screens are interesting, right? We've never seen anything with this breadth before. I think what we need to do is learn from it. I think what we need to do is, in a very open way, say what's working. How do we make a screen like this work? This is a unique circumstance. Is there something we can do in the act to improve it so that screens like this make sense and actually give the public confidence that they're useful? I think that's the question, and that's the conversation we need to have, is how to make screens make sense at this level.
What do we currently know about this screen? We've been talking about this ethics screen that was negotiated with the Prime Minister. What do we know about it other than those who are responsible for its application? Do you believe that it is transparent enough?
I think one of the things that we can learn here is that we should be learning as we go with respect to this screen. There should be an ongoing conversation about how it works and how that proportionality clause is going to be operationalized. Because what I really do believe is that if we understand how this screen works, we can update the Act to include standards that are higher for screens. With respect to public reporting, maybe, which is, I think, the thing that everyone's getting at here is there's no public reporting that's part of this screen. Maybe we want some of that. But I think maybe we also want to put into words the proportionality bit, because that is the counterbalance to the general application rule. Right?
Étant donné que ce sont des gens qui...
Given that these are subordinates to the Prime Minister and they have to manage the application of this screen, do you not believe that there should be a review done by an external reviewer or supervisor that would come from the Commissioner's office, and we wouldn't have to require the use of the ethics commissioner, but to have ongoing reviews instead of only when a case occurs. Would that not ensure more transparency? Because currently the people applying the screen are subordinates. And so we don't even know if they are in a situation of a conflict of interest.
I think that point is very well taken. I think you would get some resistance to the idea of someone external to the Prime Minister's dealings being able to provide oversight, because there are going to be interactions that are confidential, and that must necessarily stay so. And so there is a level of trust we have to put in the people who are responsible for the screen. But I do think you're absolutely right to point out that being subordinate to the Prime Minister means that you are in a conflict of interest. You care about his interests in as much as you care about the public interest, because you sit at his pleasure. There's no way to avoid that. You could have part or at least some sense of reporting back into the commissioner's office on an ongoing basis. And that may have to go through the commissioner themselves as opposed to through someone delegated by the commissioner.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stedman. Merci, M. Thériault. Mr. Cooper for 5, suivi par Madame Lapointe pour 5. Go ahead. Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Recently, the Prime Minister, our jet-setting Prime Minister, in his trips to New York City and London, England, met with several prominent business as well as investment leaders. When he was asked on the weekend who he met with, the Prime Minister refused to say. He refused to be transparent. He merely said he met with, quote, investment-type investors, close quote. Quote, people who have global capital, close quote. And then he said, we'll need significant capital in respect of certain unnamed and unspecified projects. Now, we know that there has never been a Prime Minister with more potential conflicts of interest than this Prime Minister. We have never had a Prime Minister with an ethics screen as vast as the one that is imposed on this Prime Minister in light of those multitude of potential conflicts of interest. And we know that this so-called ethics screen has no mechanisms to ensure that there are checks and balances to see that it in fact is being triggered when it ought to be. Instead, we are left to simply trust the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council, who serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister and answer to the Prime Minister, and who are therefore not independent. That simply isn't good enough to simply say we're going to trust them, because, frankly, we don't know whether the ethics screen should have been triggered. We don't know if what was discussed, whether the Prime Minister stands in any way to personally benefit from any discussions, any decisions that might be in the process of being made arising from the discussions that he had in London and New York. And we know that despite the fact that the Prime Minister is subject to this ethics screen, he may make decisions that he stands to personally benefit from. I say at the very least, well, that's unacceptable, and there needs to be, in the face of that, at the very least, some level of transparency. Canadians deserve to know who the Prime Minister is meeting with, why he was meeting with them, and they need to have the assurance that this very flimsy ethics screen is, at the very least, being triggered when it ought to be. And the Prime Minister has provided no answers to any of those questions. And so with that, I would put on notice the following motion, that having regard for the fact that the Prime Minister met with several business as well as investment leaders in his recent trips to New York City, New York, and London, England, and the Prime Minister has refused to disclose which individuals and or entities he met with during those trips, and is subject, pursuant to the Conflict of Interest Act, to an ethics screen intended to prevent him for making decisions related to 100 free companies that would place him in a conflict of interest, the committee order from the Prime Minister's office production of records which comprehensively list each individual and, if applicable, the name of which entity, corporation, organization, and or agency they represented and their job title that was present in a meeting with the Prime Minister, the time and date at which those meetings took place, and what was discussed in those meetings from and including September 21, 2025 to and including September 28, 2025, and that these records be deposited with the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than 1 week following the adoption of this motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. So you're putting that motion on notice. I'm going to ask that you distribute that to the clerk in both official languages so that it can be redistributed to all members of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. You still have 20 seconds left. Are you done? Okay. Madame Lapointe, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to you both to our committee. I listened to your presentations with attention. I have a question for you, Ms. Turnbull. Earlier, you talked about opposition leaders who could eventually become Prime Minister, and that the ethic rules should apply to them as well. And I would like to hear more on that, please.
Okay, thank you. And if I said they should, I'm sorry, because it's not so much that I think they should. It's an avenue to think about in the event that you were looking at potential loopholes, because I really don't think that leadership candidates should be subject to disclosure requirements. I think that's inappropriate. I think that it's putting an undue burden on them when they are not public office holders. There's no public value to having someone who is a contestant.
I'm wondering where this music is coming from.
Not necessarily going to win, have to disclose their financial holdings. I think that's not appropriate. However, if the person wins and they become the Prime Minister in the same moment, then immediately they are subject to an ethics regime. But if you win and you become a leader of an opposition party, you're not. But yet, it could be possible that if the government is defeated, for example, that person might become in an executive position very quickly, in which case they would be subject to the Conflict of Interest Act. They would have to disclose within 60 days. So it doesn't stress me out that this is the case, but opposition leaders are powerful. Opposition leaders can have, in my view, can be the subject of foreign interference, for example. They can be the subject of people who are anticipating perhaps that they will become Prime Minister and they want to think about what that might mean down the road. So it's not like they're necessarily just the same as an MP who is not in a leadership role. But whether that puts them in a space where they would have to bear different ethics rules, I'm not sure about that, because if they're not in the executive, it could be that the public responsibility is not enough to warrant them to have to disclose what they have.
Pour aller un peu plus loin, là, vous avez parlé principalement
You mentioned an opposition leader, but currently we're in a minority government. We know that each party has a role to play. Would you apply this to all party leaders, that there could be potential conflict of interest?
I think if you were going to do it, it would make sense to do it that way. I mean, it strikes me, and in the current situation where you've got a minority government and then the official opposition has such a significant amount of the seats, there's no, it's not like the opposition benches are equally divided sort of thing, right? Like there's a clear official opposition. They're the obvious contender to government. I think there would probably be a sense that that particular opposition leader, the official opposition leader, whose constitutional role is to be a prime minister in waiting. There's an argument to be made that maybe there's a special responsibility on the part of that person to be transparent about what their holdings are in the event that they end up in that role. But I think in order to kind of be fair, it could be any party leader who ends up holding the confidence in the House in the event that the prime minister loses it. Typically in Canada, we don't see that. right? Like it's not so much the constitutional side of it, it's kind of the way that we see party relationships develop. There's no sense of the parties are all going to work together to hoist someone up and defeat the government. We don't see that kind of thing in our parliamentary system normally, but in other parliamentary systems it happens all the time, where there could be a party leader who ends up organizing amongst a number of other political parties to say now they're going to put themselves up at the prime minister. So there's a bit of a kind of the tradition of how we practice things versus what's possible.
Merci, c'est intéressant. Et il y a tantôt, vous avez parlé.
Earlier, we were talking about ethical rules, and we talked about the line between what is acceptable and what isn't, and that it was difficult to define. I would like for you to elaborate on that, please.
I mean, I think sometimes you're going to get a lot of public agreement about what's appropriate and what's not. But then sometimes the ethics rules will create a rule about something in order to provide clarification. So if a gift to an MP, for example, is under a certain amount, that's okay. You can accept it. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. But over that amount, maybe you don't accept it. Maybe you disclose it. That sort of thing can be arbitrary. It's not necessarily that everybody's going to come to that in the same way. And it's not that someone who thinks that a $500 gift is appropriate is unethical and a $200 gift person is ethical. Like, it's not that. It's a question of you have to put something down in writing so that everybody knows and everybody has as a common standard. And so I think to the extent that ethics rules provide clarity about that, they're very helpful. And it's not about some people are good, some people are bad. It's a question of where do we draw the line and where can we agree that there is a line so that you're not having people on different sides of it.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Just contradicted
Merci,
yourself.
Madame Lapointe.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe.
To both Professor Turnbull and Professor Stedman for being here today. I found your contributions valuable to the committee, and I appreciate you both taking the time to be in front of us today. On behalf of Canadians, I want to say thank you. Two things before we go. First, I want to welcome a new staff member in my office. Rachel's over there. Wave, Rachel. Say hi to everyone. So you'll be seeing a lot of Rachel over the coming months. And the second thing is on Monday, we've got both the Privacy Commissioner and the Lobbying Commissioner that are going to be before us. I believe you've already received the briefing notes on that. So I look forward to a great discussion. We haven't seen them in months, and it'll be good to see them again. So that's it for today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
Okay, that was really worth watching. That first hour was like bombshell worthy. So I'm gonna go ahead and get some clips out from the first hour because that dude was fantastic. And like I said, I have the schedule on the community page. When you go to the channel and you click posts, I usually try to post the day before what I'm doing the next day. So we'll be live at 11 a.m. We'll have Proc, and they'll be discussing the election. And then 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there's going to be Pierre and Carney back in question period. And then at 3:30, just right after question period, we're going to have the International Trade Committee talk about the upcoming negotiations for CUSMA. So it'll be a couple liberal ministers in there, and that should be pretty interesting as well. But this was probably the spiciest committee I've had in a while. That was crazy. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks everybody for rejoining the club that joined up. You know, Tammy, Leona, Just Me, Nicole, E. Kingston, all you guys joining the coffee support and the Axe the Tax Club. Really appreciate you guys. And I will see you guys tomorrow. For sure. Yes, Proc should be pretty good. All right, I'm going to get some clips out from that first hour. I still got a little bit of work to do, so I will see you all guys tomorrow. Have a fantastic evening, and cheers.